End. The early morning hours of June 10, 1912. While most of America slept peacefully, an entire household in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, was silently wiped out. 8 people were murdered in their beds without a single scream reported by neighbors. 6 of the victims were children. By sunrise, the killer had already disappeared, leaving behind a crime so disturbing that it would haunt American history for more than a century. At the time, Villisca was a quiet farming community of roughly 2,500 residents. It was the kind of town where people trusted one another, where serious crime was rare, and where families felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked at night. News traveled fast, and strangers stood out immediately. The idea that something so violent could happen there seemed impossible. The Moore family was well known and respected. Josiah Moore was 43 years old and owned a successful farm implement business. He was considered hardworking, dependable, and deeply involved in the local church. His wife, Sarah Moore, was 39 and equally active in the community. Together, they were raising 4 children: Herman, age 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5. The family lived in a modest white frame house on 2nd Street, not far from the center of town. On Sunday evening, June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended a Children's Day program at the local Presbyterian church. Events like this were common and important in small towns. Children sang hymns, recited verses, and participated in simple performances. The program ended around 9:30 p.m. Afterward, 2 sisters who had attended the event with them, 12-year-old Lena Stillinger and 8-year-old Ina Stillinger, were invited to spend the night at the Moore home. The girls' parents agreed without hesitation. Sleepovers among church friends were normal and considered safe. The group left the church together and walked through the quiet streets of Villisca. Nothing unusual was reported that night. No strange figures were seen, and no suspicious noises were remembered later. By around 10 p.m., the Moore house was closed up for the night. Oil lamps were turned off, and the house went dark. Inside the home, the sleeping arrangements were simple. Josiah and Sarah Moore slept in a downstairs bedroom. Upstairs, the 4 more children shared one bedroom, while Lena and Ina Stillinger slept in another room across the narrow hallway. The staircase leading upstairs was known to creak, and the house itself was not large. Under normal circumstances, any loud movement would likely have been noticed. At some point after midnight and before dawn on June 10th, an unknown person entered the Moore home. There were no confirmed signs of forced entry. Doors were not broken, and windows were intact. This suggested that the killer either knew how to enter quietly, had access to the house, or was already familiar with it. The weapon used was an axe that belonged to Josiah Moore. It was normally kept on the property, likely outside or in a shed. This detail deeply troubled investigators later because it meant the killer did not bring a weapon into the house. Instead, they found one there and used it. The attack began in the downstairs bedroom. Josiah Moore was struck repeatedly in the head while sleeping. The blows were severe and fatal. Sarah Moore was attacked next, also while in bed. There was no clear evidence that either had time to escape or fight back. The attack was swift and deliberate. After killing the parents, the murderer went upstairs. In the children's bedroom, the 4 more children were attacked one by one as they slept. Investigators later noted that some of the children had defensive wounds on their arms and hands, suggesting they may have partially awakened and tried to protect themselves. The violence was extreme, but there were no signs of panic throughout the house. No one outside heard cries for help. The killer then entered the room where Lena and Ina Stillinger were sleeping. Lena, the older sister, was likely attacked first. Ina appeared to have woken up and possibly attempted to move or escape before being struck. Her body was found in a position that suggested movement. Like the others, both girls were killed in their beds. One of the most disturbing details was that in most cases, the blunt end of the axe was used rather than the blade. This required more force and repeated blows. It suggested a level of intent and control that deeply unsettled investigators. After all, 8 victims were dead. The killer did not leave immediately. Instead, the person moved through the house. Curtains and blinds were pulled shut throughout the home, even in rooms where no one slept. Mirrors and windows were covered with cloth or clothing, as if the killer wanted privacy or did not want to see their own reflection. Every victim's face was covered with bedding or garments. In the living room, a slab of bacon was found left behind. In the kitchen, investigators discovered a bowl of water containing bloody residue, indicating the killer likely washed their hands or the weapon before leaving. Despite the brutality of the crime, nothing of value was stolen. Money was left untouched. This was not a robbery. The killer eventually left the house before sunrise. At around 8 a.m. on June 10th, Mary Peckham, a neighbor, noticed something strange. The Moore house was unusually quiet. Josiah Moore had not opened his business, which was highly unusual for him. Concerned, she knocked on the door, but received no answer. She then contacted Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. When Ross Moore and others entered the house, they discovered the bodies and immediately alerted authorities. However, what followed would severely damage the investigation. The crime scene was not properly secured. Word spread quickly, and dozens of townspeople, officials, and curious onlookers entered the home. People walked through rooms, touched objects, and stepped through bloodstains. Evidence was moved, altered, or destroyed. At the time, modern crime scene procedures were not well understood, and the damage was irreversible. News of the murders spread rapidly across the country. Newspapers called it one of the most horrific crimes in American history. Fear spread through Villisca and surrounding towns. People began locking doors, arming themselves, and suspecting neighbors. Investigators from outside Iowa were brought in, but they faced enormous challenges. Physical evidence was limited, witness accounts were unreliable, and rumors were widespread. Several suspects emerged over the years. One was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. He had a history of mental illness and displayed strange behavior, spots. In 1917, 5 years after the murders, Kelly confessed multiple times during interrogation. However, his confessions were inconsistent, and he later recanted. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. He was tried and ultimately acquitted. Another suspect was William Blackie Mansfield, a known serial killer whose previous crimes shared similarities with the Villisca murders. He was arrested and tried in 1917 as well. Despite circumstantial similarities, prosecutors could not prove his involvement. He was acquitted. Frank Jones, a local businessman and former employer of Josiah Moore, was also suspected due to a personal dispute between the two men. Rumors spread that Jones may have wanted revenge. However, no direct evidence ever linked him to the crime, and he was never charged. As years passed, the case grew colder. Evidence deteriorated. Witnesses died. Leads disappeared. The Moore house eventually stood empty. Over time, it became a symbol of the town's darkest moment. Villisca itself was never the same. The sense of safety that once defined the community was permanently shattered. More than a century later, the Villisca Axe murders remain officially unsolved. The house still stands today, preserved much as it was in 1912. The names of the victims are remembered, but the identity of the killer remains unknown. And that is what makes this case so terrifying. Not just the brutality of the crime, but the fact that whoever walked into that house after midnight on June 10, 1912, killed 8 sleeping people, calmly covered their faces, washed up, and walked away, was never identified, never convicted, and never truly brought to justice.